Okay, we're live. Yet another Ask Us Anything. Me, Victor, Scott in the other corner. Ask your questions, otherwise we go home and stop the stream. So start typing questions. We're going to answer them if we know. If we don't, we're going to say that we have no idea and move to the next one. First come, first served. Now, while waiting for questions, until people start typing something, Scott, what's on your mind? Are you impressed with Minio? Is that the...
Yeah, that's the new thing that I'm looking at. No. Been trying to catch up with all the announcements from reInvent this week at in Vegas. I will say, beyond whether the announcements are good or not, I will say it is quite impressive that usually within like a half hour of the session, the recording is up on YouTube. So there are thousands of recordings already, which is quite amazing.
Yeah, and you watched them all.
I watch a lot of them on 2x speed, or listen to them 2x speed, and if anything interests me, I bookmark it to actually listen to later at normal speed.
You know, to me, the most interesting announcements are those that result in sponsors of AWS reInvent going out of business. Because there is always kind of like everybody waits for the keynote, kind of like, okay, what will AWS introduce, and am I out of business now?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay,
we got a question.
So let's see. This is more like a statement than a question. I'm working on plain ID policies assistant where it will compare policies between environments. Not a question, statement. So very cool.
Here's the question.
Okay. I have a question. What is the best way to compare two policies using AI to give the best suggestion for developers? Like two policies to give best suggestion. Do you understand the question, Scott?
If the idea is like you have a Kyverno policy that differs between, let's say, dev and prod, I would say, it probably shouldn't. Just one should be in block and the other should be in audit, right? Like, I wouldn't try to have different policies. I think that having the same policies in dev is better, simply because, just don't block on everything necessarily in dev.
Yeah, but what would be to give the best suggestion to developers in that case? That's the thing that confuses me.
Maybe like what would fail in the next environment? Like, would this fail in the next environment? At which point I would say you don't use AI, you use the dry run capabilities of the Kyverno CLI to run against a resource and see. Like, this is one of those things where I think we sometimes overthink where AI is going to be beneficial for us. I think the best thing to do is to have a mechanism. Now, it may be an MCP, but that MCP in the backend should be calling the Kyverno CLI against should be pulling in the two files and doing actual code logic of pull the two files, diff, respond back. There should be no agentic element in the backend. Maybe an agent calls your tool that is a script, basically, but nothing beyond that.
The logic I tend to use is use automation for repeatable things and use AI for surprises, right? Or creative part. And in the concept of policies, assuming that we guessed right? If the point is kind of like, hey, first, run policies to see whether they pass. Second, if they don't, fix it. Run policies would be what you, Scott, mentioned, kind of like just dry run or apply to the cluster that already has those policies. But then if it fails, you can ask AI kind of, how do I fix this? Right? Then you can evolve it, because that's not necessarily not necessarily every time something fails a policy, the fix is exactly the same, right? It depends on the context of what you're doing, the resources and stuff like that, right? So use the AI for non-repeatable things. That's my gist.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Okay. From Joseph, I have a quick one. Do you see any benefits in using different Nginx Ingress controllers to stream files, like multi-part uploads? Is it okay to use same instances for streams and API calls? I never tried streaming or even doing something that large through Nginx, so I have no idea.
Yeah, again, your issue is going to be throughput, right, in the end on all of these things, which is why for a lot of things like that, people are using node port service type load balancer, ALB, which is external and gives you a different load balancer, right? There are use cases. It really isn't a question of streaming and API calls together. It's a question of how much throughput you need to have, right, and how much throughput that single ingress is going to use. Now, if you mention Nginx Ingress controller, whether you're talking about Ingress Nginx or Nginx Ingress are a big difference. If you're using Ingress Nginx, get the hell off of it, because in March that's dead. And if you're on Nginx Ingress, I'm sorry. That one's not dead, but I'm sorry. So I would say get off of it as well, and move to Gateway API. When you move to Gateway API, this is going to be one of the benefits you have, because it makes it very easy to spin up multiple gateways and things like that in case you do need that additional throughput. It makes it very easy to spin up additional gateways and, dynamically attach them and all of that. So that would be my recommendation, would be get the hell off of Ingress Nginx onto something that's more performant, something that's better, something that is more modern.
Okay, let's see next. This is I guess more of a statement than a question. We have a process that in dev, if you want to promote new policies, updated policies into higher environments, we have 20 teams that each team has different plain ID namespace. I'm not sure whether you want to comment on that or just leave it as a statement, Scott.
Yeah, no, and it's related to the previous ones of the policies, right? Again, so for all of that, that seems, like we were saying, a lot of this seems that it's scriptable. And if it's scriptable, this is a script. Now, whether you decide that that script is exposed through an MCP or not, that's up to you and what you want to give your developer as the interface. I don't think it needs to be. I think having that as I think having that as a GitHub action that runs in every repo and pulls back and pushes back on the PR things, right? Like before you're going to make an update or whatever it is the right place to do that. But, either way, don't be using AI for this. AI may be the way they get to the script, not what your logic does. You don't use AI for this logic.
I mean, you don't use AI for anything that is repeatable, period.
Exactly.
You can use AI to write that repeatable thing. That's it.
Exactly.
If you're using Flux and planning to incorporate Crossplane, how would you handle approach fleet management for 40 plus clusters? I'm not sure I get I can imagine infinite number of variations of this. Do you get it? Is it kind of crossplanes on different clusters or crossplane managing stuff in different clusters?
So in general, my approach on all of these things is very simple. You want an actual fleet management tool. Can you build one with Flux plus Crossplane plus all of that? Yeah. Do you want to? Probably not. You probably want a fleet manager and then that handles a lot of these things and then have Flux and Crossplane working in tandem with a tool that is actually built for fleet management if you have the money. If you don't have the money, then, you build I like to call it the poor man fleet managent, right? Cluster API, Crossplane, Flux CD.
Wait. If you have the money, then go to Upbound. Give them money. say that. Mention my name. I might get a raise. Who knows?
Exactly. No. So I think that you actually want a fleet manager, which I've said multiple times that my favorite is Spectro Cloud, but it could be Spectro Ranch or whatever it is. You want an actual fleet manager here. D2IQ, which is now NKP, right? Whatever it is, Giant Swarm. I don't care. You want a fleet manager that actually handles this. I think now, hopefully, that fleet manager supports Crossplane to provision it. If not, it really comes down to what you mean. And if you put back a comment on what you mean, are you talking about Crossplane to provision a cluster? Are you talking about Crossplane to manage resources within those clusters? We can give a better answer around this. Yeah. But kudos on using Crossplane and kudos on using Flux. Both are the right choices relative to the alternatives.
Okay, I just got my alarm ringing because I always forget to mention we have a sponsor, Octopus Support. I even have a screen here. There we go. Octopus is a sponsor of this stream. Go to their enterprise support for Argo, whatever you need for Argo. Their maintainers, they know what they're doing. Go there, check them out. Tell them we sent you, and that's it. I feel that we repeated it so many times that I'm getting bored repeating it. Anyways, they know what they're doing. They have folks behind the project, maintainers of the project. If you need help, if you need support, go to Octopus and contact them, and you will be happy. They will be happy. Everybody's gonna be happy. And that's the worst possible pitch one can ever make. There we go. Okay, let's go back to where were we? I'm planning to implement Backstage at an org for fixing issues like software inventory, docs, and governance. Any tips? This is your domain, Scott. If I start, I will go down the wrong part. Like, hey, you don't fix issues like software inventory, docs, and governance from Backstage.
No.
You decorate it. You display the fixed version through Backstage. That's my gist.
So there's a few ways of kind of fixing things. And what I mean by that, by kind of fixing things, is that I recommend strongly looking into tech insights and the ability to basically add these retrievers that allow you to like do scorecards on things. Where basically, number one, I believe in the idea of auto-ingesting in resources, not requiring there to be a catalog info YAML in every repo, right? Like, I built the Kubernetes ingester plugin, I built one for VCF automation, there's one for Azure resources, there's one from AWS, or there's about 30 of them from AWS, right? Like, different ways to ingest in resources into the catalog automatically from the runtime. That, I think, is the best approach. And then to have tags, for example, in AWS or tags in Azure be how you map to specific values, let's say, within the catalog entity. Same thing, Kubernetes annotations to map things into the entity itself. Now, what I would say is that what you want to do is that's going to give you a very bare bones manifest. Right? Because it's not going to have all of the rich data that you would want. That is where you build tech insight scorecards, basically, that let teams see both on a component level and a team level how they are and kind of gamify it. You gamify against all other teams. Like here, your component is in the lowest 10% of applications in terms of coverage within their entity of metadata. Right? You don't have your docs in the system. There's a scaffolder action, for example, if you guys use Confluence, that can take Confluence, convert it to Markdown, and push it up with MKDocs into the Git repo so that then it can be managed as docs as code instead of in the slowest loading document system that exists on planet Earth from Atlassian, who had to buy a browser because their products are so slow. Right? In the end, there are multiple ways of doing this. I think gamifying it, auto-ingesting number one, so you have everything in, it's bare bones, and then gamifying the way of getting it so people add their metadata into the platform. That's the way to show the benefit. The other thing is, and this is very important, you have to figure out what the biggest pain point is right now in the company that isn't any of those things, and make it so that's solved, so you have a solution to it in Backstage that only works if the person is up to a certain standard of scorecards, right? Like, only if they add this data in do they get all of a sudden this huge value. And then what you want to do is you never want to force someone down a golden path. What you want to do is make it worthwhile for them to put in the effort to get onto the golden path. So don't just try to solve those issues. Figure out what the actual pain point for the end user is and build a solution around that them standardizing these things through tooling you offer in Backstage or outside will enable, right? That would be my general approach.
I can never add anything to what you're saying about Backstage. You just know it much more than me. Okay, so more from Joseph. My setup are Nginx, the one that is being discontinued, behind, and my worry is buffering with multi-part upload. I worry it affects my other use cases, API calls, and so on and so forth. I mean, I feel that that's the answer you already gave, Scott. Go for Gateway API because it's so easy to split it into multiple, how do they call it? My brain froze.
There's multiple gateways, and then you have HTTP.
Multiple gateways, exactly.
You can just, basically you create a gateway class, and then you can create multiple gateways, and then when you create your HTTP, TLS, TCP, gRPC, UDP routes, you attach them to a gateway. Again, it is not, I believe there is zero issue with streaming and API calls going on the same ingress if the throughput of that, of what you need in total, fits within the boundaries of that, specific ingress.
You mean ingress throughput or the networking itself?
The networking, right? In the end, and the ingress itself, right? There's the network itself, right?
If the networking is not enough, then doesn't matter how many times you split it. It's still the same networking.
Well, it does.
Right?
It does. It does, because each gateway can run on a different node, which means it has a different NIC, which means that it has another networking stack, which means that it can run on its own.
Okay. Yeah, but it's still coming. Now this is my ignorance, but it's still kind of, those requests are entering into the cluster before they even reach the ingress, right?
Well, again,
And then it's forwarded.
Okay, in a typical environment, in a typical networking, if we take out of the question AWS, who still believe in routable pods and VPC, CNI, and all that crap, right? If we take a normal environment where it's not routable pods, because then it's a bit differently, right? But in a normal environment, Google, Azure, AWS, if you're not using VPC, CNI with routable pods, all of that, on-prem, whatever it is, basically, typically, it will create a service type load balancer. That load balancer is an external load balancer that has its backend a node port on the nodes of your cluster. Basically, as its backends, it will go to the node port. From there, it goes to kubeproxy or to Cilium if it's not using kubeproxy. And from there, it goes to the actual pod itself, which is where it processes also the networking. And then it goes back out to kubeproxy to go to the service endpoints, chooses the endpoint, and goes to your pod. Now, when
I was referring now to the bottleneck in all that, before it even reaches ingress, right?
So there's the external load balancer's throughput. When I have two gateways, it goes to two different load balancers because it's two different IPs, meaning there again, I have separate network traffic. So I've doubled my network throughput outside of the cluster. When I get to the cluster itself, it depends on how stupid the load balancing algorithms are or how smart they are of how they choose their backends that they go to. If they do it based off of least connections, if they do it based off of the load, if they do it based off of round robin, whatever, you have a better chance of them going to two separate nodes. So if it goes to two separate nodes, then again, the node traffic on that internal entrance into kubeproxy is going to be minimal. Kubeproxy is running as a daemon set, so you're not going to have the issue in that case, right? It's just per node, whatever it lands on is where it goes through. Then it goes to the ingress. The ingress is where the actual majority of the processing happens, because that's where you're doing layer 7 processing for the ingress rules. That's where typically is the most CPU cycles. From that point, it goes routed out into kubeproxy, and then it just comes down to what traffic you have in your cluster, right? But the ingress is a key element because that's where layer 7 offloading is happening. Typically, that's TLS decryption is happening there, maybe TLS re-encryption if you're doing re-encryption to the backends, right? All of these things are happening in the ingress, so that's where the most CPU time is being spent and the most wait time. Yeah.
Okay, back to Eric. There are multiple ways to approach it: buy versus adopt, like Armada versus build. We are planning to use Flux crossplane as fundamental platform components. I mean, without entering into the fleet itself, those are the right components. I mean, you just made a day to Scott by saying Flux and crossplane, kind of like yes.
Exactly.
Right. Now, there are many ways. I still don't understand fully your use case, so because there are still many ways you can let crossplane manage resources in other clusters. You can let Flux manage resources in other clusters. You can have one crossplane, you can have many crossplanes. It gets a bit complicated from there, right? But I don't know about you, Scott, but I cannot answer anything in more detail without knowing more, really.
It's hard to answer in more detail, except for I can tell you my general approach is that you should be having you should have a brain cluster. When you reach that scale of 40 plus clusters, you should have a brain cluster with crossplane and Flux, let's say. In this case, let's say that you went down the build approach, okay, instead of the buy. In that case, I would have a brain cluster which has Flux and crossplane that provision clusters. Flux syncs down crossplane manifest. That crossplane manifest that creates the cluster is going to install a cluster, install onto it crossplane and Flux CD, and install the base Flux customization, Git repository, whatever it is that is going to sync down the rest of things into the cluster. So all that the main crossplane Flux is in charge of is provisioning the cluster and provisioning that, again, that that local management plane that manages everything else. I do not like the approach of having an external cross-plane flux managing everything in all the other clusters. You get to bottlenecks, you get to weird things, and then you have to shard things and performance it. No, it's have a single pane of glass that manages the pushing of that general configuration, and then the reconciliation happens by a local flux, by a local crossplane, all of that. You can use the GitHub crossplane provider locally to provision, even if you wanted a different GitOps repo per cluster, to create the GitOps repo in advance.
Be careful there with that last recommendation of Scott, because you can easily hit the GitHub API limits.
Well, if you do like you, Victor, and add files in. If you're just doing GitHub repos, you're not going to have that issue.
There you go.
So create a template repo and do the clone of the template repo into a repo wherever it is, and then you don't have that issue. That issue comes when you had the compositions, Victor, with 50 files in them. So you're reconciling.
What can I say? When I say something, I say it from experience. Don't do what I did. That's basically
Exactly.
most of the cases, yes.
Exactly. But creating a repo is fine, I think. Right? So create the repo, create that, and I think that's the right way of approaching it.
Okay, so more from Eric. How do you feel? What do you feel is a good MCP gateway to access? There are multiple of MCP servers popping up. So let me start by saying that the few MCP gateways I saw did not fit what I feel are the requirements. So let me give you a gist of what I feel that I would expect from API gateway. MCP gateway. First is of course authentication. And that's already tough because many MCPs themselves will not give you means to authenticate different users, right? You will see, I don't know, like Kubernetes MCP, and then it can only accept one kube config, and then if you want to have different settings, authentication per user, that's going to fail miserably. I blame both gateways and MCPs themselves for that. Another thing because let me actually stop for a second or go back. I think that companies eventually will be running MCPs remotely instead of, hey, everybody runs 50 MCPs locally and stuff like that. I think that makes sense. Now, one thing that I haven't seen, I'm not saying it doesn't exist because I haven't used all of them, is that I would also like them to be able to select which tools will be accessible, right? Because the fact that you want to, among others, let's say Kubernetes, let's say Git MCP, right? And that exposes 50 different tools that are going to kill your context, and you just need 5. Some kind of selection so that that gateway does not expose MCP as is, but actually limits the tools to what you, company, whomever thinks that you should be using, would be probably my second requirement, right, outside of authentication.
Yeah. By the way, your terrible CLI tool that costs more money than a mansion to run their
CLI?
AI models, Claude Code. They don't allow you to select tools, do they? From an MCP?
No, they don't. They don't.
Yeah. Exactly. Right, what like Microsoft and VS Code have enabled for a long time, you guys can't enable through because it's a CLI and very incapable.
No, I don't think that the reason is because it's CLI.
It's because it's Anthropic.
That's a hill I'm going to die on, that right now Cloud Code is the best client combined with Anthropic agents. That's a hill I'm going to die on, with OpenCode being the second.
OpenCode is getting so good right now. It's insane.
Yes.
It is so good.
Okay, next one from Eden or Edenar. What do you think about Flux Uncontained? I haven't used it. I don't know. Have you used it, Scott? I googled it quickly before when I saw the question, but I still don't understand from the pitch on the website what it is. So I don't know. I haven't used it, and I see that.
I don't know.
Whenever Scott stops paying attention, that means that he's googling. He's gonna make a educated guess.
I really don't know what it is, and I don't get it by the 30-second looking at it. So yeah, don't know.
Yeah. So, but I feel that that's the feedback to the project. If you cannot figure out just by glancing at it,
Right.
whether you want to check it more.
Right. The project may be amazing. They need to fix their docs. Because I should be able to look at the main page, and it should not be an AI-generated picture of a computer with, a Kubernetes wheel, like, somehow coming out of it. Like, yeah, it makes no sense.
Anyway, I'll do my best to check it, but I have no idea. Okay, next one from Chris. Okay. Does it make sense to deploy Cilium via Argo CD, or would you deploy it before? I would deploy it. I would set it up during creation of the cluster.
Well, yeah, it has to be set up before Argo
There
CD.
are ways how to change the cluster to use Cilium, but that's such a nightmare and so much pain that I don't want to do it. I would rather create a new cluster with Cilium than upgrade the existing cluster with Cilium and then transition stuff to that cluster. Then upgrading to use Cilium is just a nightmare. I don't want to do it ever again.
Ever. Changing CNIs is always a nightmare, be it Cilium or be it anything else, and Cilium is even that much worse because you're moving off of kube proxy, and then you're changing everything, right? Which makes it even more of a complex thing than other CNIs.
Okay, from Luther, is standardizing the components needed to build applications APIs a prerequisite for building an efficient engineering platform? What to there's always a new variation exception always coming up. I'm not going to say that it's needed. You can do it in many different ways. But I will stand behind the claim that if you want to build a platform, doesn't matter whether it's internal, external, whatever, you need to expose your stuff through APIs if you want to do it right. Whichever I'm not even going into technology, yes. If it's a platform, doesn't matter, public, like AWS, private, like internal developer platform or anything else, APIs should be, and they're not a prerequisite, but in this century, they should be. Yes.
Yes, and I would say you do need to standardize components to build applications in order to have an efficient engineering platform. If you don't have standardization of components, you don't have a platform. Because if you don't have standardization of your components, now that doesn't mean that you can't have multiple standards. Okay? You can have a way to build a container through build packs and a way to build a container using Docker files. That's fine. You have two standard ways of deploying something. A standard does not necessarily mean that there's only one, but you need to create some level of boundaries so that you can actually offer a service. Because the idea of a platform is you're offering some level of a service to someone. And in order to do that, you have to standardize. You can't offer everything.
Here's what I feel is one of the biggest mistakes people make when trying to do some kind of internal platform something is that they're trying to figure out how to do it or standardize or whatever you want to call it for 100% of use cases. And that means that you're going to make, because of the 20% of outliers, you're going to make everybody miserable. There is nothing necessarily wrong that when you have exceptions or some cases that are only for one team, you don't have to use the platform, right? It shouldn't be a requirement. You figure out what are the things that will help majority of people. Whatever that is, that becomes your platform. And it's like similar, like hey, you're using AWS, it's a platform, right? If it doesn't cover your 100% of the cases, but 80, that's still fine. That's great. You can do 80% without their services, right? Or somewhere else. Perfectly fine. And then once you capture that I'm doing 20% of the work for 80% of the people instead of vice versa, then standardization becomes even less of a no-brainer in a way, right?
Exactly. And once you've covered that 80%, you can create more generic offerings that also cover the other 20% or 10% of that 20% and all of that. They're the last ones, though. The first thing you deal with is how do you build simple services for those 80%? You don't build the same service to cover the other 20%. If you want to create something that also solves that 20% later, you can, but you don't put the 80% at the expense of that 20%. That's the key.
And combine, right? Let's say that you standardize and say everybody uses OCI images, right? And everybody uses GitHub Actions. Let's say something, right? Now somebody comes up with Wasm, and that's a single person or single team. And you say, I'm not going to standardize your specific use case,
Right.
but you can still use GitHub Actions, right? Of like you just replace the build.sh in that GitHub Actions with something else. It's fine. You can, all those 20% can still benefit, just not necessarily have a black box solution.
Right, exactly.
Okay, is it worth to use Crossplane to provision resources in the other name infras living on-prem? I know it's not that friendly with on-prem despite of having some providers, but still not sure. So
it's very friendly on-prem.
I think that there are two things here, right? One is Crossplane providers that allow you to interact with something like AWS, Azure, what's or not, right? And that's where you might hit some walls with Crossplane, that there is no provider for something on-prem that you're using, right? And you can build your own, but let's exclude that for a second. Let's say that you don't want to build anything yourself, right? Now, the other, and in my opinion, more important aspect of Crossplane is creating XRD, what we call XRDs, or custom resource definitions and controllers that will generate those API endpoints that we mentioned before and figure out what to do when somebody creates whatever, right? Oh, do this, do that, in on-prem or wherever, right? That's valid no matter what, right? So there is nothing wrong with you saying, okay, I have this case that is not covered with the Crossplane providers, but there is some other, from some other vendor, operator, CRD, whatever, like Cluster API would be a great example, right? Cluster API covers situations that are not covered in any form of way with Crossplane providers, right? You can still build that XRD, that composition, right? And say, okay, so I will use AWS provider for this, and then I will do something else for something else. It still composes together, no matter whether you're using Crossplane providers or any other Kubernetes resource. So the question is really whether you will find Kubernetes resource to do something. That's the real question, right? Or you have to build your own.
Exactly. And if it's build your own, Crossplane will be the easiest for you to build your own as long as there's a Terraform provider for whatever it is you're trying to target, right? Which, unless you're talking about like Hyper-V, there is. Right? There are Terraform providers for basically everything on-prem today.
Yeah. And you know, these days, unless it's something really kind of legacy and obscure and what's not, there should be an operator or CRD or whatever controller for that something.
Well, there aren't. There aren't. Like, Proxmox doesn't have one, vSphere doesn't have one, Nutanix kind of has one for some of their things, but not really, right? Like, I mean, like, again, you need to build them, but they have Terraform providers, right? And so use the Terraform provider to build a Crossplane object provider, and it still is going to be so much better and give you so much benefit.
Okay, now from Luther, this is specifically for you, Scott, not for me, even though we were both at KubeCon. Have you seen any trends or ideas in KubeCon?
I saw trends of really good bars in Atlanta. Those were the trends that I saw. No, so I will say there were a few things, not really. I've been watching a lot of the videos as well from KubeCon. I think that, you know, finally the realization seems to be steeping in with people that AI is just a workload.
You're not talking about running it.
running it.
Yeah.
Building it, inference, all of the training and all of that. There's a lot of cool things happening around that, and that's where like the AI talks really were. It was really I was really happy to see that people were kind of sick about talking about AI in like every session. Like it was there, but it was always like is that anecdote of okay, well I guess we need to talk about AI, right? And it was like for the 1 minute or whatever, and then it was back to the actual technology part because AI is never the goal. I believe AI is a tool that we can use to do things. I think that for last year's KubeCons, it was 100% AI. Kubernetes was almost not mentioned because it was all just AI, and it was horrifying in my mind. I think that it's gotten a lot better this year at KubeCon. I will say I have the same rule basically as Victor. I don't know if you entered any sessions that weren't yours this year. I did not enter a single one that wasn't my sessions because there's only one track that matters to me, which is the hallway track of actually talking to people, meeting people, all of that. So were there some cool startups that I saw in the pavilion? Yes. But it's really about building the connections with people there that matters.
I will repeat what I said quite a few times before. I think that we entered the phase when innovation or completely new ideas are not anymore common. I'm not saying that they don't exist, but they're not common because this is Kubernetes now is in the mature stage, right?
Yep.
Similar like, this would be overstatement, similar like Linux, right? But similar like Linux in terms that you don't expect there to come, if you go to some Linux conference, some completely new idea, kind of like we have a completely new kernel, right? Kind of like this is kind of complete game changing. I'm not saying that is not happening, but we are way past the stage where we would go to KubeCon and then the first day your head is spinning, kind of like, what just happened? Kind of like, I just heard for the first time of something called service mesh. What the heck is that? Right? Or we are not in that phase anymore. Again, I'm not saying it doesn't exist.
Right.
It's just not as common as it was before.
What we're in the phase of now that I really like, though, is how do we simplify operations of these things? Because till now we were in the geeking out on technology of, Envoy versus HA proxy versus Ingress versus Nginx, and who has better performance, and who has this, and Cilium versus Calico versus Antria versus this. It's like, no, none of that matters. How do I make it easy to implement service mesh? How do I make it easy to gain these capabilities of networking? How do I make it easy to upgrade my clusters? Like what we're seeing over the last 2 years, EKS auto mode, AKS automatic. Before that you had GKE autopilot, but it's as bad as it always was, so don't use it. But the other two are really good, right? Like we're seeing more and more fleet management. We're seeing more and more solutions out there for FinOps that are actually doing things like in smart ways of how do we optimize resource requests, right? I think the only thing that was, kind of interesting, and I had known about it because it's been GA since 133, but is moving forwards a lot, is all of the work going on in in-place resource upgrades. There were some cool talks about that are, I think, again, that's not a, oh my God thing. That is something that's, okay, how do we solve operational challenges that exist in running production workloads at scale on Kubernetes? And that's where we're at now. Operational efficiency and not filling in the blocks of operations that we don't have a solution for because it was a new platform.
I feel that part of the reason for that is that most people, not many, let's say many people or companies, they're not anymore trying to figure out which choices to make, right? Kind of,
right.
The companies are not competing anymore. Hey, how can I convince you to choose Cilium instead of whatever else? Kind of like you already made that choice, very likely. Significant percentage, kind of like now it's kind of how do we make it work, right?
Right. Exactly. And be it things like, right, Amazon just announced their EKS capabilities, right? Managed Argo CD, which, I hate because I'm a Flux person, and Amazon abandoned Flux and it was part of their products, and then they went with, for some reason, with the sponsor of this video, not the core technology of the sponsor of this video, right, of Argo CD, right? But, in the end, that is going to make companies at some level decide, okay, I'm going with Argo CD because that's what I get from my distribution, right? What's nice is that EKS used to be EKS. EBS CSI, maybe IRSA at some level or another. Everything was AWS only. And now all of a sudden they have add-ons for Cert Manager. They have add-ons for external DNS. They have add-ons for Argo CD. They have add-ons for Crow. They have, in the end, same thing Azure has, same thing Tanzu has, same thing Spectro Cloud has. So decisions are being made for us simply by the fact that most people are using a distribution.
Yeah, but it's also for those creating distributions like AWS. Now it is infinitely easier and less time consuming to do those things than, let's say, 5, 6, 7 years ago, right? Because I'm not entering now into, I don't want to enter into discussion this tool versus that, right? But kind of, you can say as AWS, for example, okay, what are the most commonly used tools
right
in production for this type of problem? Argo CD, right? Cool.
Great.
We are going to use Argo CD. I'm not saying it's better or worse. I'm not. This is not the discussion.
Exactly.
This, right? But kind of, okay. So what is the networking? There are 2 choices we can choose from, not 50, right? Or 3. Cool.
Right.
Let's put that as part of our box that we are giving people, right? Now you can make that decision precisely because industry mostly made already choices, not for everything, but for significant part of the components, kind of like we.
Yeah.
Okay, Scott, is there a public repo for your backstage crossplane blah 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 workshop?
Yeah, so there's a few different repos. There's the repo of in the back minus stack org. There's the KubeCon one, which has the entire workshop, which you can spin up which is the workshop I did on this with Courtney Nickerson and Anna Medina and I'm sorry, I'm blanking out on the Argo CD guy's name.
My brain stopped.
Christian
yes.
Hernandez. Yeah, exactly. Right. So, there's that repo. It's under the back minus stack org in GitHub, KubeCon NA 2025. And then there's also the Backstage plugins themselves, which are github.com/TerraSky-OSS/Backstage plugins. Just write Backstage plugins Terra Sky in Google and you'll find it right away. And that's where all the source code is, including a demo app with all of the things and a link to a GitHub Pages website with all the docs on the plugins. Feel free to reach out on Slack or anything.
Okay, thanks for the early response related to Backstage. I'm struggling to map our organization's apps, services, and environments into data model. It feels a bit rigid. Any advice on structuring? Is it rigid? I never thought. I never thought it's. I thought it's different, maybe, rather than rigid.
So again, you can call it rigid. It follows basically a kind of adapted C4 model for modeling things. Right, the C4 modeling architecture basically kind of it took from that and then made a few kind of caveats to it. Now, again, you have a component, you have a resource, you have a system, you have a domain, and then you have users and groups, right? That's what you have, and you have APIs, right? Those are the kinds. I tell everyone, do not create custom kinds in Backstage. It is a horrifying idea, don't do it. What you can do is have as many types as you want. There's a spec type field, and you can have a million types of a component, of a resource, all of that. The general approach that I have on these things is quite simple, which is that you should not be adapting Backstage always, or any tool, Do not adapt the tool to your organization. If you are using an industry standard tool, adapt your organization to the tool. Because if you start to make tools work for your organization and not need to make any changes, in the end, you are going to veer away from the product. And there's, I'm forgetting the name of that law. There's like one of those like big philosophical things of if you create an API and you publicize it out there and there was the way that you thought that it should be used, but you didn't put in guardrails, and there was a way to do something, someone will have used it that way, right? Someone will always use things in the wrong way, and then they're going to break you.
That applies to almost all
I said
tools,
any product. I said any
Exactly.
product. Adapt yourself to the technology and not the technology to you.
I mean,
because you won't gain the benefits of the technology. That doesn't mean that you don't try and see how does this fit and whatever, but don't use the tool in a unnatural way for the tool.
I feel that I would correct you slightly on adapt yourself to the tool. You don't necessarily want to adapt yourself always to the tool, but if you realize that actually adapting yourself to the tool, you have to adapt, and that's too much work, unacceptable, or maybe the tool is wrong, right? Or maybe you're not ready for the tool, right? Kind of, I know back in the day we had those cases where people could not adapt to Kubernetes, right? Because they had WebLogic. And say, okay, so you have two choices, kind of like you keep reusing WebLogic and just forget about Kubernetes for now, right? Or you adapt to Kubernetes because you see the reason in that, right? But the tool might be wrong for what you're trying to do.
Don't run your WebLogic monolith in Kubernetes, though. Which is why
either keep it and say Kubernetes is not a good choice for me. That's good. That's a valid option. Or you say Kubernetes is a good choice. We were maybe doing it right before, but now we're not doing it right anymore for that choice.
Right.
One or the two.
Right? If all you want, and I can't believe I'm about to say this, but if all you want is a glorified UI around all of the things that you have in an organization and you don't want to make any changes to your organization, that's where tools that I don't like, but tools like Port fit in because they have the most flexible data model in the world because they just don't care. JSON schema, build whatever data model you want. Backstage is for teams that want to standardize on the C4 model, which is the model that has proven itself in many other organizations. It is harder to adopt because of that, because it requires you to adopt yourself to the platform instead of the platform adopting itself to you. But I think long-term is the better model. I think it creates standardization. I think it prevents leaky abstractions that people end up building in things like Port, because the second you have control over the data model, you're going to create bad abstractions. Inevitably, I think in 99% of cases. But if you can't adapt yourself to the tool, Backstage isn't the right tool for you. Go and choose a tool like Port or whatever.
And there is another reason is that, let's say that you do adapt, you change the tool to be how you envisioned it instead of the authors. You will likely have real difficulties to adopt future new features or improvements of that tool, right? Because you're starting to diverge from it. Because Backstage, probably like Kubernetes and others, they will assume that, hey, when we develop this new feature, we develop it in a way that it works for people who are already using it in this way, not in any random way, right? Now this is from Eden. It's supposed to be alternative to containers. That's Flux. I understood. That's basically the only thing I understood. I just don't understand how, because, and this is me speaking without knowing what it does. And that's that. Whenever I hear it, this is similar to Wasm in my head. Hey, there is a better way to do it than containers. I'm all in as long as my stuff is going to continue mostly to work, meaning the ecosystem. Right, and I don't know whether that's the case of Flux or no. Flux.
Right.
And please name things in a way that I can. This is probably the third time that I say Flux instead of Flux. Please name projects in a way that I don't get confused.
Yeah. I agree. Again, if this is another way of building in the end a container image, fine. If it's not a container image and now I need to have different runtimes in Kubernetes and then half of the things that I have aren't going to work with it, I'm against it. So if this is a better way of building container images that doesn't require a Docker file that allows me to do things in a better way, blah, 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 fine with it. WASM fails in my mind because of that and nothing works with it. And if this is going down that same approach, I'm very much against it. If it's like the idea of build packs, which was a change for how I build a container from the Docker file approach, and it auto-detected and built it, awesome. Huge supporter of creating efficiencies in the SDLC. Not about changing the technology unless there is a big enough value from the tool that actually makes it worthwhile, and I have yet to see anything that comes even close to that. And all I will say is that from how long this project has been around, if neither me nor Victor have heard about it, and at KubeCon it wasn't being talked about and all of that, and we were walking around talking to people about these things all the time, I don't believe that it's the next big thing if there was zero talk about it that I heard at KubeCon. I think that if it was the next big thing, we probably would have heard about it. I heard WASM a dozen times, and it's not worth anything in my mind.
I cannot say about Flux, but I feel that the failure of WASM, and I don't know how much that applies to Flux or no, is that if you want to change things that are commonly used and established, you need to have a very, very good reason. It cannot be slightly better, right? It needs to be very good enough to convince the whole industry to move to it. Kubernetes did that, right? Just to be clear, I am for a change, and eventually we will replace containers with something else, and eventually we will replace Kubernetes for something else. But it needs to be for a reason, for a sufficiently big reason, and you need to have a backing of, you need to get to the point that actually the industry itself backs you on that, right? It cannot be just you, right? Because then it's you against everybody, and that does not work.
Yeah.
Ask Docker how that works. What are your thoughts on ephemeral environments? Is DevPod something IDPs should offer? Without me answering DevPod specifically, ephemeral environments are awesome. Not necessarily something you should use always and what's or not, but being able to spin up an environment to do something or validate something and then destroy that environment instead of polluting pre-production staging or whatever with random stuff is awesome. And I'm really big supporter of enabling everybody to go at their own speed. When I hear that, hey, we just developed this, but we need to wait for this team to actually finish this in this environment, so before we can do that in this environment, I freak out, right? So, and if ephemeral environments are going to enable you to enable each developer in your organization to go as fast as that person can go without waiting for others to do something, I think it's awesome. And ephemeral environments are part of the story.
Yeah, I think that, ephemeral environments and remote development environments are similar but different, right? DevPod is not for ephemeral environments, it's for remote development environments, which may be ephemeral as well.
I still ephemeral.
Typically are, what?
I still ephemeral.
It is, right? But I'm saying typically when people say ephemeral environments, you're talking about ephemeral like test environments, things like that get spun up from PRs, all that. Again, huge supporter of that. Right, whether it be through Flux Operator, through Argo app sets, through whatever mechanism is doing that for you, awesome. Huge supporter of ephemeral testing environments. Remote development environments, I'm a huge supporter of as well. I used to be a huge supporter of DevPod. I built Backstage plugins for it. I love it. I really love DevPod. The last release was in March. I have a major issue with that because Loft have moved all of their focus to vCluster. It seems they have completely basically abandoned it. And that is sad in my mind because DevPod really showed a lot of potential. I loved it as a tool.
But it's also it's sad, but it's reality. Kind of like
It is.
Loft spin up multiple projects, trying to see what is the market fit for their business, because they need to have some business, and they figured out vCluster is the thing we can build on.
Exactly. And you know what? I don't blame them for that or anything. I find it very unfortunate because I personally love DevPod. It's just, I can't really full-heartedly recommend it to anyone today because it's just like very not maintained, right? Which makes it, sad in my mind. My number one recommendation in that space right now is GitHub Codespaces, if you can. GitHub Codespace, I think, is awesome. And it uses the same dev container that you use with DevPod, right? So, it's awesome.
In other words, you really like dev containers with whichever wrapper comes on top of it.
I like standards. I don't care. I don't necessarily think that dev containers is the best standard in the world. I wish it had ways of spinning stuff outside of the dev container. I wish there's a bunch of stuff that I wish that was better, okay, about dev containers. However, I always will prefer a tool that follows a standard rather than something that doesn't follow that standard. Now, if we're talking purely the best technological piece, Octeto, I believe, is the best for development environments today, but it's hard for me to recommend anything that doesn't follow the standards of like dev containers, right? So Octeto YAML is nice. I love Ramiro. I love the team at Octeto. They're doing amazing stuff. I like standards. I like OTel. I like open metrics. I like standards. And the same thing goes for dev containers.
Okay, we have 3 minutes left, so let's go fast. Can you briefly explain the difference between Argo CD and Tekton? What would you use, one or the other? Tekton is a workflow tool. That's how I'm going to call it, like GitHub Actions or Argo workflows and stuff like that. What they do is sequential. I mean, it can be parallel, but eventually sequential execution of certain steps. Do this, do that, do this, do that, do this, do that. It could be parallel, but basically you define what should be executed and when. Argo CD or Flux or GitOps tools in general, they are asynchronous pull-based mechanisms that are watching Git repo, comparing something in Git or OCI registry, and if there is a difference between what you see there and what is in a cluster, they would apply the difference, right? So, and you can define the whole CI/CD with tools like Tekton without Argo CD, right? Or you can say, I define all that in Tekton, like, hey, I build, I run tests, I do this, I do that. And at one point, whichever tool you're using, I'm going to push changes to this repository and I'm done. And then at some moment in the future, Argo CD or Flux will detect those changes and synchronize it, or what you would call deploy it, right? So you can think of Tekton as a full CI/CD workflow, and you can think of Argo CD or Flux as being one step in that workflow, which is in charge of synchronization or deployment, right? Mm-hmm. Even though it's not executed directly by Tekton.
Right.
Anything to add, Scott?
No, when would you use one over the other? I would always use Tekton. I would never use Argo CD. I would use Tekton.
Okay,
and Flux
when
CD.
would you use GitOps versus workflows? That's probably the right question.
I will use GitOps for CD. I will never use Tekton for CD. I will use Tekton for CI, always over Argo workflows. But again, Tekton CI, CD is Argo CD or Flux CD or...
But I hate you, Scott. Scott, I really dislike you, man, now, because now we can't enter into discussion what is CD. And because we have no time.
Do you want to talk about continuous delivery or continuous deployment? I'm talking about delivery, which is actually delivering it to the cluster.
Okay. Ask us next week, and we can have a long fight between me and Scott for the CD.
Yes.
Thank you for recommending open code. Cool. He asked me before for KubeCon. That's why he asked you. Cool. Any recommendations to integrate backstage with GitOps when one service creation requires several PRs across different repos? This is your domain, Scott.
Again, it's the solutions that I've built haven't been built that way because I don't like the approaches where the definition of a service is required to be across different repos, because then I don't have a single source of truth and it's hard for me to figure out what's going on. I prefer things to be self-contained units, but there is no reason that a software template cannot have 2 steps to publish different files and different paths to different Git repos. I have seen that done many times. You can easily structure something out to do it that way.
It's usually a smell of something wrong as well.
Yeah, the second you need to separate into multiple repos, that typically means that the structure of your GitOps repo is not magnificent.
Scott, I have a perfect comment now to close the session.
I know, I saw it. It's magnificent.
Jenkins is better than Argo CD.
Yes! 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 100%. Completely agree. I'm sorry, Octopus. Please keep sponsoring us. But I completely agree.
Okay, folks. I see that more questions are coming in. We are out of time. Come next week. Ask earlier, and we'll talk about it. Thank you all for coming. See you next week.
Cheers.